question later. If you put your hand up, turn a single microphone on as well.
Okay, I wanted to start by talking about what I've seen happen in cystic fibrosis research over the past 35 years. So I think it's really interesting in terms of treatment. And I'm going to assume that everyone who's listening in has some connection, either is someone who's living with cystic fibrosis or has a child with cystic fibrosis or a friend with CF. And therefore, one of the things you learn when you do research in this field or clinical care in this field is that the families know as much about the disease, often more, than the doctors or the researchers who are treating it. And in fact, one of the pleasures of working in the cystic fibrosis research area is just how bright and how committed many of the people, many of the families are. When you sort of look at the history of CF care, if you go back 30 or 40 years, it was an extraordinarily depressing. Can we do anything with these slides?
Oh, yeah, you can move on. Just move on to the next. I'll do it for you.
Move on to the second. Yeah, here we go.
Oh,
no, that's it. Okay, so I started in 79, and the gene was not known, but the most important thing was just how depressed everyone was. The doctors who were looking after kids with CF were saints, genuine saints, because they couldn't do anything much to help. The treatment was starvation because people were very worried about the fact that the stools were often fatty. And the families, the patients were depressed, and the average life expectancy was maybe 10 or 15 years. Occasional person might live to 20. Today, a person who is born with cystic fibrosis has every prospect of living into their 40s, 50s, 60s, and if care continues to get better, we're going to be looking at normal life expectancy. Now, that's not to say that CF isn't a difficult, dangerous, and problematic disease. It is in many ways. But the thing that really fascinates me, having started work in 79 on CF, the thing that really fascinates me is that the enormous advances that have happened, both in how well people living with CF are and how long they live, it's happened without a single breakthrough, without a single thing on the front page of the Courier Mail saying, God, this is fantastic. We all hoped that gene therapy was going to be this. We're now hoping that stem cell therapy will be this. But the truth is, it's really baby steps. Better antibiotics, better nutrition, better physiotherapy, and very, very aggressive clinical care that's led to the improvement. So if you think today, the average child born with cystic fibrosis in 2013 has a life expectancy of 35, 40, 45 years, that's been achieved without any of the dramatic breakthroughs. And part of what we're looking forward to is further improvements. And the further improvements can't only be in just how long you live. The further improvements have to be also in how well you are while you have those extra years of life, because it's really quality of life that's the most important thing for all of us, whether we're living with CF or living with anything else. And I think that one of the most dramatic changes that's taken place now is that we suddenly have the possibility of designer drugs. Now, I've already had one question about Kalydeco from someone who sent it in by email. What's the name of it?
This is Elaine.
Elaine sent in a question about Kalydeco. But I think before I try to answer the question, one of the interesting things about cystic fibrosis is that about 75 or 80% of people with CF have a mutation, have a gene change that causes the disease in the cystic fibrosis transmembrane protein that's called delta F508. I'm sure you've all heard of delta F508. This is the mutation that's shared by about 25 million people worldwide who are all cousins. And what it does is it doesn't stop the protein being made in the cell, but it stops it getting from the inside of the cell to the membrane. But there are other mutations. mutations that stop the protein forming the right kind of shape so that it's got the hole in the right place and can transport ions. There are other mutations that say stop and stop making the protein when it ought to be reading a much longer code. It ought to be reading a much longer sentence. And so the designer drugs are made to deal with particular problems. And Calideco is made to deal with the particular problem that a reasonably common mutation that might affect about 1 million people worldwide, G551D, the particular problem that has. And if you have got that mutation, then chances are that you're going to respond to Calideco. And in fact, the people who are responding very well. But suppose you have one of the other mutations. Suppose also you have a mutation where it's influenced by whether you make a lot of the protein or a small amount of the protein. You might have heard of 5T, 7T, 9T. That determines whether you make a great deal of the protein or a very small amount of the protein, and it operates at the gene level. It's whether it makes the intermediate, the so-called messenger RNA, which carries the signal from the engine house of the cell and the nucleus right through to the outside of the cell where proteins are made. And the answer is, first, in general terms, each mutation will have a designer drug that's made to deal with it. Some, like 551D, are going to be relatively easy. Some, like Delta F508, are going to be relatively hard. But to some extent, it's got to be mutation-specific, because each mutation acts in a slightly different way. It's the same gene, the same protein, the same disease. Every person with cystic fibrosis has a mutation in that particular gene, the so-called CFTR gene, but they're different mutations, so it has a different impact. But then we come to something which may surprise you. We don't know everything. It shouldn't surprise you because there's no field where people know everything. And in this case, sometimes you just got to try it. So Elaine, the answer to your question is, I don't think Calideco is going to work for people with mutations that are of a different type. But the best way to find out is to actually have a trial, because each of these mutations is going to be different. It's going to take a bit of time because we need more experience to know exactly how long, how well, at what concentration people are going to respond to the drug. But I suggest that you have a word with your doctor. I mean, one of the advantages you have now in Queensland, hasn't always been the case, but now in Queensland you've got really, really good doctors. I know people like Claire Wainwright, Peter Sly, Scott Bell, a few of the other doctors. They're really committed, and they can go into the literature and they can find out and answer these questions. But we don't know everything, and sometimes it's just going to be necessary to try to find out by actually doing a test. And one of the critical things, one of the points I'd make is that many of the treatments that we're looking at really don't have much in the way of side effects, but some of them do. Now, for instance, if we're looking at using DNAs to loosen the mucus or the salt water mist or any of these things, that doesn't have much in the way of side effects. Doesn't work on everyone. Some people are really helped by it. Other medications, like after a transplant, the medications that are used to prevent rejection, they do have side effects, sometimes quite serious side effects. So the doctors are the people who can assess whether the side effects are going to be a problem or not. And if the side effects are not a problem, it's really worth considering doing a check on whether things work or not. There's some more questions.
Simon wants to ask.
Okay. Can we turn Simon's mic on?
Yeah. Hey, Simon, can you hear us okay?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, wow,
have
good.
You got a question for us?
Yeah, I'm 46 years old with CF.
Can you get a bit closer to the microphone, Simon? It's a bit faint.
Oh, hang on.
Okay?
Is that better? Is that better?
That's better. Great.
Fantastic.
Great.
Is that better?
Right. Yep, much
Yeah.
better.
I have I'm 46 years old with CF, and I generally live a pretty normal life, like I'm surfing every day and everything. But I have a rare gene. I mean, mine's C15851G, and the other one's C3140 mutation. So it's not on the Calideco list of genes at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what are the prospects for someone like me?
There are
So I've
five.
got like the different mutations, yeah.
Yep. That's a very good question, and the fact you have different mutations is interesting because you're what's called a compound heterozygote, so you actually have a different mutation on the two chromosome 7. I'm not familiar with every mutation, obviously, and I'm not sure exactly what class of mutations yours fall into. If it were a mutation where there's a stop codon that doesn't work properly, it might respond to one of the drugs that's being developed now in the Hadassah Research Institute in Israel. If it's a mutation where the protein doesn't fold properly, it might respond to new drugs that are being developed. What you need to do is you need to check which group of mutations are your particular mutations under. Now, as I say, because you've got different mutations, it's possible that there are two different classes of mutation, two different groups of mutation, in which case you're likely to find that one of them at least will respond. Now, the interesting thing, I actually always find people like yourself really one of the most interesting things about CF. If someone is living a reasonably normal life up to the age of 46 and doesn't have too many problems, let's remember that when I was born, the average life expectancy in Scotland of men was only just 55. So you're really fairly close to that already. Now, you look after yourself, obviously. You go surfing, which is particularly good in the case of a respiratory problem like CF. Will any of the drugs that are being developed help? My guess is that the answer will be yes, but it will be yes probably in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time. What you want to be absolutely certain to do is to look at the CF Foundation website for the American CF Foundation, because they're the ones who are involved in drug development for each of the different kinds of mutations. And you'll be able to track how things are progressing. And then I'm not sure which hospital you're associated with here, your treatments through. Which hospital are you associated with?
I'm at the Gold Coast Hospital.
Right. Your
Gold Coast Hospital
consultant,
with Dr. Feather and Maureen, yeah.
yeah, the doctors who are looking after you, the most important thing I suggest to patients in your position are make sure that the people who are running clinical trials know about your existence, because you are really a very valuable patient. You have got 2 different mutations, neither of which are common, but both of which are not that uncommon. What they're probably 1 or 2% of the total number of mutations. And you could be a really important person to be enrolled in a clinical trial. And if you're enrolled in a clinical trial, it's very good for you, because you get the chance then to really get early care and the very best care, and participate also in helping other people. So my suggestion to anyone who has a rare mutation is make certain that you're on the list of people who are known by the people who are developing these medications, because you're just the sort of person they may want to guarantee to have on their list. You can probably, with 2 different mutations, each of which is not common, you may be just the person who will give a precious piece of information if you're in that clinical trial. So I actually suggest to everyone, obviously Delta F508 homozygotes are not rare at all. They're very common. But I suggest that anyone who has a rare gene, they should really try to get into clinical trials.
Hey, we've got another question here, Bob, from Nicole, who's Nicole Crosley. I was recently reading about soy for D508. I have a 6-month-old boy with D508.
Look, to be absolutely honest, in the old days, like 30 years ago, families would come and they'd have all kinds of ideas of alternative therapies that they felt helped them, whether it be soy or herbal medicines or this or that. And to be absolutely honest, I don't know many CF families where they haven't tried one or another of these things over the years. I have 2 pieces of advice. The first is, don't stop taking the medicine that is given to you by your doctor because you're trying something alternative. That is very dangerous. We have to keep our CF children, our CF babies, on the recommended diets, the recommended physios, the recommended antibiotics where there are antibiotics. This is very dangerous not to do that. That's not to say you shouldn't try something else. Talk to your doctor. Your doctor should be willing to listen to you when you're proposing alternatives and to tell you, in most cases, they'll say, give it a go. It probably won't do you any harm, and see if it does any good. But do not discontinue the normal therapies. The second bit of advice I'd give is, watch out for snake oil salesmen. If the soy diet you're talking about, soy milk, something like that, if it costs $1 or $2, that's fine. But if someone's asking for $1,000 or $10,000 for trying something like that, chances are they're in it, I hate to say it, but they're often in it for the money rather than to help. And I do really get a bit saddened when I see people taking their savings and trying it on something. But when it comes to ordinary dietary things, when it comes to acupuncture, when it comes to yoga, when it comes to anything like this, to be honest, it does good. I mean, I'm just talking as a layperson here. I'm a scientist and not a medical doctor, but I know many people who benefit from all of these interventions. I should say, particularly when they're older, I suppose a 6-month baby, you really want to follow the tried and tested routes for the most part. But certainly when I talk to teenagers with CF, they'll often benefit enormously from alternative things they do, but do it in addition, not instead of medical care.
A few people are asking if we could roll on with the content you'd planned, Bob. I think that's a good idea.
Sure.
Maybe push through the slides a bit and catch a few questions a bit later on.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Yeah.
You go to the next one.
Okay, next one. Yeah, that's... Okay.
Too far there. Okay.
Okay, we went for the gene. One of the things which new families in CF probably don't know is that cystic fibrosis was the first disease that was really looked at to find the gene when we didn't know to begin with what the gene was. This is really quite interesting, and what we did and what the group in Toronto, Lapchi Sui's group in Toronto did was to collect families with lots of affected children, and then we had a go at looking where the mutation was by following other genes and seeing which ones went together with cystic fibrosis. And we found that cystic fibrosis was on chromosome 7, and then when we found that, if I click that, it doesn't go. I have to roll
towards you. Yeah.
Okay, not going. Okay.
Next one.
Next one, yeah. Right. Now, I want to talk a bit about Big Pharma here because I think it's really interesting. When we identified that the gene was on chromosome 7, and that was my group in London did that, immediately Collaborative Research, a small biotech company, announced, we own chromosome 7. Now, I personally find the developments of drugs and the development of gene testing quite interesting. I actually don't believe that companies should be allowed to patent DNA sequences. But if a university patents it and makes it available to everyone, that's different. Now, you might have heard of the breast cancer gene, the BRCA1 gene. That's been patented by an American company called Myriad. And what they're doing is saying they are the only people who are allowed to test, and they charge $4,000 for the test. Now, I think that's outrageous, to be honest, and I think that shouldn't be allowed. Having said that, what the American Cystic Fibrosis Foundation has found is that they haven't been able to develop drugs using a standard university network. Because the truth is, university scientists are not that good at biotechnology and drug development. And the companies are really very good at it. So what we really need is to develop partnerships between biotechnology and between the basic scientists and doctors. The biotechnology companies need the patients, they need the doctors, they need the funding and support to take them over a period when they're not going to get much. But at the end of the day, when they develop a drug, they're going to charge for it. And it's foolish to imagine that we're going to get something for free if we're using the biotech agency. The biotech people, they'll do it quickly. What's going to be the cost of Kalydeco? We don't know, but it's certainly going to be in 5 figures, certainly going to be, I will predict it's going to be tens of thousands.
It's $250K at the moment.
250,000 at the moment. Well, that'll come down, but it won't come down that much. And they're going to make a lot of money out of it at the end of the day. I just hope it works as well as we hope. Okay, go on to the next one. Now, the question of Australian involvement in research. I think Australian involvement in research is an interesting question, and I put it to all of you, people living with CF, people with family members, friends with CF. Why do we bother? I mean, the American CF Foundation is spending something like $300 million a year on research. The British CF Trust is spending about 10 million, 15 million pounds a year on research. Why should we do research? Why don't we just buy it in? One of the main reasons why research in Australia is important is really the question that was asked about therapy by the bloke.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, we're very disorganized here.
Simon.
Simon's question. Simon, if we want to get access to the most up-to-date drugs, to the most up-to-date therapies, we are really only going to get access to it if they know we exist and if our scientists are part of the international teams that do things. We've got to have ways of identifying the gene mutations. We've got to have ways of assessing people's progress. We've got to have ways of doing the fundamental research here. But the second reason, you think of your clinicians here, the really good clinicians who many people are going to. Those clinicians are staying in Australia, they're staying in Brisbane, they're staying in Melbourne because they're participating in research. Research is the cherry on the top of the ice cream sundae. It's really the reason that doctors and scientists want to stay here. And unfortunately, if we stop doing research, we're going to lose a lot of these people. They will not stay in Australia. They will not come to Australia. So that's the reason why raising money for research matters. I mean, often people say, why don't we just let the Americans do the research and we'll just buy it in? But the answer is we won't have the doctors and the scientists who will be able to assess it and who will be able to get you and your children and you yourself, Simon, into those trials unless we're involved in doing it. So I think that's really important. Now, next one. I do want to talk briefly about prenatal diagnosis. Prenatal diagnosis is a personal choice. I personally believe that we should make prenatal diagnosis available, but we have to support everyone who wants to use it, and we have to support everyone equally who doesn't want to use it. And this is where not having a feedback doesn't help, is I'd love to hear your views on this. I'm very much in favor of supporting people, and if they want to use prenatal diagnosis, that's fine. Having said that, I must admit that having been involved in starting it, I am very much a supporter, particularly of pre-implantation diagnosis. I think that there is no woman who wants to have an abortion if she can help it. Abortions are always extraordinarily difficult procedures to go through. Even if people have taken the decision, they already usually are looking after one CF child. They couldn't have the burden of looking after two. Having said that, pre-implantation diagnosis is something that is available and people should really know about. This is where you use IVF and you test the embryo before implanting it in the womb and the uterus for whether or not it's going to develop CF, and you use an embryo that will not develop CF for the implantation. It's not cheap, it's expensive, it costs, unfortunately, $5,000 or $6,000. It is, I think, ironic that having a prenatal test at 9 or 10 weeks of pregnancy is free, followed by an abortion, but pre-implantation diagnosis, which avoids this, actually costs money, and I'm hoping that will change over the next period. But pre-implantation diagnosis is something I think couples should be thinking about, talking about, and so on. I think it's a great advance because it avoids the need for a termination of pregnancy, and therefore I think for couples who have decided they can't face having another child with CF, I think it's really very important. But I come back to the fact that when I ran the clinical service in Victoria, I emphasized to everyone, I'm pro-choice, but pro-choice means you support people whatever choice they take. If they choose to use pre-implantation or prenatal diagnosis, you support them. If they choose not to use it, you support them as well. And I think that's terribly important for professionals.
That's great. Do you want to press on, or would you want to ask if people have a comment?
Anyone have any comments? Yeah.
If you put your hand up, I'll turn your microphone on for you.
Is that a hand up there?
No, not yet. Maybe just press on.
Okay, let's press on.
The eugenics?
No, we can go on a bit from there. The point I'm making in the eugenics one is that I don't believe we'll ever go back to the sort of Nazi type of eugenics where people are forcibly sterilized because they might have a child with a handicap. But I do think that we all have to be disability activists. Now, I can put to you, actually, I was talking to some people last night about this. Cystic fibrosis has been listed as a disability, which means that people with cystic fibrosis will...
In the NDIS?
Yes, in the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which in some ways is a good thing, because people are going to have disability, the various privileges that go with that available to them. On the other hand, we talk to someone like Simon or someone like Mitch Messer, who Mitch is 53 now, with cystic fibrosis, and he's not a disability person at all. I mean, he's active and Delta F508 homozygote, and yet doing an enormous amount of stuff. And so I think we've got to be careful. We don't want to encourage all of the wonderful people living with CF to necessarily think of themselves as disabled when they're spending so much of their time as normal integrated members of the community. And I find this a very difficult one. In fact, this is the sort of time when I wish we were all sitting in a room together and able to talk to one another. I'm really interested, I don't know, Simon, if you have a view on this, I'm really interested what people who have really tried hard to maintain a normal lifestyle think about the idea that CF is going to be listed as a disability condition for the new National Disability Insurance Scheme. Anyone got their hand up? No one got their hand up. No? Okay.
What did we learn?
What did we learn? Okay. One of the interesting things we learned is about Delta F508, and someone asked a question about Delta F508. Everyone with the Delta F508 mutation is related to everyone else with the Delta F508 mutation. And that mutation happened several thousand years ago, probably in the Middle East. And we know you're all related to one another because the DNA that surrounds the Delta F508 has a sort of fingerprint. And that fingerprint there is something that can be studied, and everyone has the same fingerprint. And why are you all descended from the same person? What's so incredible about this? Why do we have 25 million people worldwide all descended from that one person who was probably zapped by a cosmic ray several thousand years ago? The reason is almost certainly that CF carriers are healthier than other people. So I'm not a CF carrier, and those of you who have had a child with CF, those of you who are carriers of CF, are really healthy and probably resist gastro when you're a baby. And the reason we think that is the cystic fibrosis protein is sitting on the surface of cells in the gut. Now, anyone who has CF or has a child with CF will know that one of the biggest problems is digestion, and the digestion is a problem because these... Okay, coffee's here. The cystic fibrosis protein sits there on the gut cells, and it also is an attachment point for the bacteria that cause gastro, for E. coli in particular. And if you are a carrier, you don't have quite as many copies of the protein on your cells, so you're less likely to get an E. coli attached, and you're less likely to develop gastro. So this is really terrific news for people who are carriers, and the carriers are healthy. Of course, if you inherit the mutation from both sides, you're not healthy. But if you only have one copy of it, it's good news, and that's why there are so many of you, all descended from the one person in the Middle East, several thousand years ago.
Bob, can I just put you on hold you for a minute? And when people don't have microphones, of course, they type their question in or a comment. And we do have an interesting comment from Kevin who says, and maybe you might want to comment on this, I'm 35 and only got diagnosed last year, have very few symptoms. I feel like I'd be ripping people off who suffer more than me. No way I'll make a claim on NDIS. I don't have speakers and microphones, so I can't. Anyway, it's interesting. I mean, it is a dilemma, isn't it? And people view it very differently.
It's a real dilemma, and it's a particular dilemma because you've got people who either because, as in Kevin's case, he has mutations that are relatively mild, or in the case of Mitch, who has severe mutations but has really spent an enormous amount of time looking after himself, and other genes seem to modify it. And they're in good, they take that attitude, and I think that's absolutely terrific. On the other hand, you have people like my friend Sean, who is really not well at the moment. He's had transplant, he has side effects from therapies and so on, and he needs disability care. And so it's this sort of one-size-fits-all problem that we often get in healthcare, where the fact that people are individuals, I mean, I don't know what Kevin thinks on this, or in fact, what any of the people listening in think, but I know one of the comments I always get from young people who are living with cystic fibrosis is, my cystic fibrosis does not define me. I'm not cystic fibrosis written across my forehead. I'm Samantha or Jim or Sean or whatnot. And obviously, the healthcare system is not very good at dealing with people as individuals. It tends to deal with everyone. I mean, they would love it if everyone with cystic fibrosis were exactly the same as everyone else with cystic fibrosis. But of course, they're not.
So there's a different view here, and Simon says, I think it should be a disability because costs are mounting, and he goes on to say, and if it is a disability, if we get care, it will help me especially as I get older. So
Yep.
there's arguments on both sides.
There are arguments on both sides, and this is one, I see both points of view. And I think the important thing is that we discuss it openly. And once again, I think we support each other. I think that it's important that Simon supports Sean, my friend Sean, and my friend Sean supports Simon, because one size does not fit all. And it's important to empower the individual. We're not only looking at cystic fibrosis. We're looking at individuals with cystic fibrosis, everyone of whom is different and everyone of whom will have a different view. It's just the same as on prenatal pre-implantation diagnosis. It's not my job as a professional to tell people what to do. It's your job to decide what to do, but it's my job to try to empower you to make those choices and put them into practice.
Do you want to press on?
Yeah, let's press on. Can we skip 2 or 3 slides
Sure.
and go to the one that says gene therapy? New approaches. Gene therapy. Right, I want to talk a little bit about gene therapy and about stem cell therapy because there was an enormous amount of hope. When the gene was first isolated by Lap Chi in 1989, we all thought, my group thought, wow, now we got the gene, all we need to do is to take a copy of the gene and put it into the cells that line the lungs, and it'll correct the disease. But what we forgot was that we're exposed to DNA. Every time we eat a meal, we have DNA from, if it's bread, we have DNA from wheat, bacon and eggs, DNA from pigs and chooks. So we're always exposed to DNA. And the body has incredibly good methods for keeping foreign DNA out of our cells. If foreign DNA even gets through the cell membrane, it's immediately chopped up by enzymes. So we have enormous problems getting genes into cells, and when we get genes into cells, the body tries to inactivate it, kicks it out, the cell dies. And in the only disease we've worked on gene therapy where it's worked, which are these bubble kids, these kids who live in bubbles because they don't have an immune system, it caused leukemia in 3 out of 14 of the kids who were treated. So the truth is, gene therapy, the hopes were high. We really thought we'd be going places, but it has not worked for CF, and we are 20 years down the track. They have another gene therapy trial going in London, very much moving on. I left London now 18 years ago, but they've been working on it, getting better and better at doing it, but it still hasn't worked for CF. We'll find out in the next year whether it will work. Using viruses in order to try gene therapy to get the genes into cells. Viruses are very good at getting genes into cells, but unfortunately most of them kill the cells when they do it. And that's not what we want. If you kill the cells, it won't work. So gene therapy, high hopes, very much more difficult than we ever thought. We thought that gene therapy would work in 5 to 10 years. It's now 20, 25 years down the track, and it hasn't worked yet. What about stem cells? Everyone's heard about stem cells. Next one, just one on.
Sorry, Bob.
No, that's great. Stem cells, right. Stem cells can come from all kinds of places. The most interesting thing for cystic fibrosis is not stem cells from embryos or even from cord blood, but the fact we can take a skin cell from someone with CF. So we take a skin cell from the arm and we grow it up in a test tube, and then we add chemicals to it so that it like turns itself back in time and it becomes like an embryo cell. So there we are in the lab. We have stem cells from patients with cystic fibrosis. How could we use these? Well, the answer is we can only use them if we can correct the mutation. There's obviously, if they're from a patient with CF, those cells will still have the CF gene, the CF mutation. So what we really need to do is to find a way of correcting it. So far, no one has been able to correct the defect in cells in a way that's meaningful. Stem cell therapy, well, you might use cells from embryos. If you use cells from embryos, big problem there is they might be rejected because they're not from you. They might cause cancer. There are all kinds of safety concerns. There are all kinds of problems. Is it going to come? Don't hold your breath. It's going to come, but probably not for 20, 25, 30 years. Stem cells so far have only been useful in the system where you have access to the blood. So for instance, in the case of leukemia, stem cells are used now and they do work. But in the case of cystic fibrosis, I think it's going to be a long time. So we're back in this situation where it's baby steps. Better antibiotics. You know, a good new antibiotic for Pseudomonas would probably be one of the single most useful things for cystic fibrosis. A new medication that safely stopped inflammation. There's one of the big problems in the lung is inflammation. That would be really useful. Better ways of dealing with diabetes. Better ways of dealing with liver disease. You know, now that so many people with CF are living so much longer, some of the problems are problems to do with things we didn't even recognize as part of CF before. About 15% of people with CF will develop liver disease. It's a problem. How do we deal with that? So I suggest to people that we're going to look over the next period to further improvements in treatment. I mean, I want to see a situation where a baby born with delta F508 homozygous will be able to look forward to 60 or 70 or 80 years of life without major health problems. That's the objective. That's what we really want to look forward to. And if we can look forward to that, I think it's going to be terrific. But my guess is we're going to be looking at baby steps all the way. Any questions? Any comments? Any hands up?
There is a question here, Bob.
Right.
This is from Tegan, who says, my son has R711H, and then a separate one, 7T/R711H17. I've been told that he may not be able to produce children. Is there anything being done in that space?
That's a very good question, and I don't know who told you well, yeah, okay. I think that the reproduction area is the area where there have been the most gratifying advances. Many men who have cystic fibrosis, even relatively mild cystic fibrosis, have a blockage in the tube that takes the sperm from the testes out of the body. So that's blocked. The sperm are there, no problem with the sperm perfectly normal, they just can't get out. And so the sexual function is completely normal as well. Sexual function doesn't depend on getting the sperm out, because vasectomy blocks that same tube. What the doctors have been able to do now is to take sperm directly from the testes and using IVF techniques, put it into the egg of the wife, the partner, and then establish for the boys normal reproduction. And a number of people whom I know, I think of someone who's on our board in Cystic Fibrosis Victoria, his wife has just had their second child, and it's really great, you know. So the answer is, it's certainly IVF. It does require IVF, but assuming that a couple really want to have a child, having cystic fibrosis is not any longer a block to a man having a child with his partner if the man has CF. For women, the situation is a little more complicated. Women with cystic fibrosis have always had the capacity to have children, but they're not as fertile as women who don't have cystic fibrosis. Often they will need IVF or they will need help. Sometimes it's hard for the sperm and the egg to actually get together because the mucus in the reproductive system is also a bit thicker, just the same as the mucus in the lungs, and obviously it requires medical help. The other thing for a woman with CF is sometimes pregnancy can actually make the disease a bit worse, and that's the reason why if a woman is thinking of having babies, obviously she really should talk it through with an expert in cystic fibrosis reproduction. Having said that, lots of women with cystic fibrosis now have had babies, and they're very, very happy to have done so. I think that reproduction is one of the things that for a lot of people is really very important. And I think the fact that people with CF now are able to have children is something that brings great pleasure to people compared to 20 years ago.
Well, in fact, Kevin sent us a message saying that's how he found out he had CF. I'm wondering if you mean the CF gene. Weren't able to get pregnant, went through IVS, had Tessa to extract sperm. Our son's now 16 weeks old.
That's good, yes.
Yeah. Look, there's another question there. Rosa wants to ask a question. I think Simon does too.
Okay.
How about, we might just, if you bear with me while I just look at those questions. There's another question here. Here's Rosa's question. Bob, after all your years of experience with CF, what would be your one main piece of advice for people with CF in terms of what they can do to gain longevity? And I'll come to you in a minute, Simon. I'll turn your microphone on, so if you bear with us.
That's a hard question. I think that there's no doubt in my mind that the young people with CF who, in the transition from childhood to adulthood, didn't lose the plot and really continued with their fitness programs, their diet programs, didn't start smoking just to show that they could, all the rest of it. I think the people during that period from about 10 or 11 years of age to about 20 years of age, the people who continued as fanatical health freaks, if you like. I hate to say it because I'm not a great one for fanatics, but those are the ones who I think have really done best. So it's really maintaining that fitness program and that dietary program and that aggressive approach to treating any form of infection consistently. I hate to say it, a lot of people with CF, look, I've got adolescent kids, a lot of adolescent kids lose it, and we're all familiar with that. But I think if you have CF, it's really, really important to be consistent because it's very hard to make it up. If you lose the ability, if you lose your lung function, if you lose your pancreatic function, it's very, very hard to make it up. So I suppose that would be my single biggest piece of advice, just based on experience, based on talking to young people.
Simon, you've had your hand up for a while. You've obviously wanted to make a comment or say something. I've got your microphone on. Do you want to? Yeah. Is it still relevant? Yeah. Whatever.
Yeah. Well, just before I start my question, I fully agree with you because I became a sort of health fitness fanatic from the age of 25, whereas before that I was drinking and smoking and all that sort of thing. And I watch my diet very, very carefully, and obviously I find surfing helps a lot. So I do agree with you, being a fitness fanatic is really critical for the kids nowadays, because a lot of kids I see with CF, they really don't care. They go out drinking, partying and smoking, and that's really not the thing you want to do at an early age. And I really regret, partying and drinking when I was small. But my question is I actually saw a recent documentary, a BBC documentary, and they actually mentioned CF, and they mentioned they were doing some research on bacteriophages, viruses that kill bacteria that might be applicable for CF. Could you share some more on that with us?
Yeah, bacteriophages are like viruses that affect bacteria and kill bacteria instead of killing people, and they are useful. The real reason for this is antibiotics work extraordinarily well on some groups of bacteria. Unfortunately, Pseudomonas are a real challenge, and antibiotics do not in general work very well on Pseudomonas and Pseudomonas family of bacteria. So they're looking for new ways. They have now discovered bacteriophages that do go for Pseudomonas. I will tell you the problem with antibiotics and phage and everything else. The truth is, you might not believe this, but bacteria are cleverer than we are. And they actually can mutate and develop resistance. And the real problem is the minute you develop a new antibiotic or a new bacteriophage or something else, the Pseudomonas immediately starts changing its genetics so that it can resist it. And I think that the real question we don't know the answer to is, what happens when you give the best available antibiotics together with a bacteriophage? Will the two together clear the infection? Now remember, the thing about infection also is that we don't fully understand this. A lot of people with CF have Pseudomonas infection, which is under control most of the time. But then something else happens, perhaps they develop another kind of cold, or even a change in the weather, even a change in getting really tired, or God forbid, smoking. Then all of a sudden it triggers a really serious infection. So there is the question of whether Pseudomonas can be cleared more effectively. As of now, the jury's out. Is it worth trying? My personal feeling is I wouldn't try it today, but I keep my eye on what's happening. And as soon as there's a clinical trial that shows that it causes benefit, then I think it's very important that we guarantee that our Australian patients participate in the clinical trials for these things. I'd love to see it a situation where Scott Bell and Claire Wainwright told me in the next month or two, well, we've just got everyone in Queensland enrolled in a clinical trial for bacteriophage or for some of the new medications that are coming through in the States. That's really the way to find out. But we can't find out based on just one person or two people. It's got to be done right.
Hey, thanks for your question, Simon. That's right on the money. Do you want to add something else?
No, also I read that there was a research, some guys were doing research on Pseudomonas, and they noticed that the bacteria under them sort of, I don't know, microscope or something, had like, in effect, legs, and they were trying to come out with some technology that could cut the legs of the Pseudomonas bacteria, because they found out it was moving around like that.
Yeah, bacteria do move around, and they do have proteins that move them, and certainly if you can inactivate those, it helps. Don't underestimate how smart bacteria are. You might not think so, but they really are very smart. I mean, one of the things they do is they exchange genes. So one bacterium will donate a gene to another bacterium, and they have a number of ways of doing this. So the result is they can pass a mutation around much more quickly than we can. So if you try to find a way to stop a bacteria moving around, you can bet that within a year or two, you'll find a whole load of bacteria have developed the genes that stop that particular method working. It's one of the big problems. You know, we have to be one step ahead of the bacteria, and we can't always manage that.
Well, Nicole Crosley's got a question. She's saying her son Harrison's had Pseudomonas twice in the last 3 months. Does this mean he will have a worse outcome? Have you got a microphone, Nicole? Because I've turned it on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can
Can
hear
you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm on my mobile.
Oh, we love that. Love to see someone using every bit of technology.
He's only 6 months old, and we're just finishing up the last lot of treatment for the second lot of Pseudomonas. So does it mean, because he's getting it so regularly, that it's going to be a long-term thing that he's always going to have it?
It depends how aggressively they treat it. It depends on what mutations he has, and it depends on, to some extent, luck. And basically, the reason nowadays, the reason they go very aggressively where they can is that it's very advantageous, if you possibly can, to get the Pseudomonas bacterium knocked out, or at least as close to knocked out as you possibly can. I don't know if with a baby as young as that, it becomes difficult because you're not wanting your baby in hospital if you can help it. You want them to spend as much time as possible at home. On the other hand, the doctors will be telling you, look, this is actually quite important, because if we can clear the Pseudomonas out, his chance of having a really healthy childhood does go up. I'm not sure if you're going to one of the Brisbane hospitals.
Yeah, she's seen Dr. Wainwright.
Oh, you're seeing that? Well, look, you've got an absolutely first-rate doctor there, and the units in the Brisbane hospitals are right on top of this. If you have, having said that, look, from my point of view, healthcare is a collaboration between the doctors and, in the case of a childhood disease, the parents. And the doctors don't make all the calls and the parents don't make all the calls. You've got to work together. And that means that you have every right to go and say, hey, look, is there any way, if you did things more aggressively, if you did things differently, are we more likely to clear this? Because you know from what you read that if you clear it, your child's prognosis over childhood is almost certainly going to be better if they're more clear. Yeah? So
we started, it was only picked up because we started a clinical trial of called Combat CF for newborns.
Yep.
Claire.
Yes.
And he had to have a bronch done, and that was the only reason we picked it up. Otherwise, we wouldn't have known. So in one way, the clinical trial was fantastic because it picked up the Pseudomonas. And we have treated it aggressively. We've been in hospital twice with the tobramycin and the nebulizer with the Toby at home and so forth. So we've been very aggressive with it. But I was just amazed that it came back so quickly. It came back, it was a couple of days after the stop of the first one. It's just...
Bit frustrating.
Well,
I'll do whatever.
Obviously, first, I'm not a medical doctor anyway, I'm a scientist, but second, I couldn't comment on a particular case even so. All I can comment is that these days, people in the Brisbane area are lucky in that you really do have absolutely first-rate clinicians up here. I mean, Claire and Sly and so on are absolutely in touch with everything.
Yep.
Hey, that's great, Nicole. Thanks for your comment and passing that on. I'm wondering, like we're sort of hitting the hour. I'm really keen to open it to any other questions that people have. Give you a chance to tag Bob while we've got him chained to the desk here. Is there anything else people have burning questions they'd really like to ask, or something that you, even just sort of broad questions? I mean, if Bob can't answer it, he'll tell you. We're open to anything that you want to ask at this stage. No hands going up, Bob, if you want to press on.
Okay, I mean, the only other point I want to make, I really just want to make one small point. Oh, are those questions?
Well, just make your point and we'll come back.
Okay, I just want to make one point. Sometimes people say, why do we need an organization like CFQ? Why do we actually need charitable funding? No, it's okay. Why do we need charitable? Oh, you've shared a slide. Why do we need charitable funding? And the reason we need charitable funding is because the government, when the government supports research and when the government supports development, they do so in a very conventional way. And it's our money. It's our tax money. And so they say, look, we'll only provide money for this research if we're pretty much guaranteed that it's going to work. And that means they get the boring research. That's what they do. They get boring stuff. In truth, when it comes to CF, most of the things that are making kids better, most of the things that are resulting in someone like Simon having kids, all the rest of it, that's come from left field. That's come from people who are doing unconventional things. When it comes to funding exciting, unconventional research, that funding comes from Cystic Fibrosis Australia. That funding comes from the CF Trust in Britain, the CF Foundation in America. It does not come from governments. Governments only come in and fund it when they think it's pretty much guaranteed. So it's really important that you get behind CFQ and that you make sure that the independent voice representing people living with CF and the families and friends of people living with CF, that independent voice is what's going to guarantee that you have a voice. And part of that is remembering there are 2,000 genetic diseases. Most of them only affect 1 or 2 people. There's a disease I worked on for a time called Friedreich's ataxia. Friedreich's ataxia has about 20 people in Queensland who are affected. They look to us, the cystic fibrosis people, to establish the right way to do things. So there are a hell of a lot of people out there who want us to succeed establishing the best possible care, the best possible clinics, the best possible outlook, because they don't have enough patients to do it themselves, and they're looking to us. We have to be the light on the hill that illuminates the whole of human genetics for the sake of hundreds and hundreds of people who can't really stand up for themselves. So I'm very much in favor of getting behind Cystic Fibrosis Australia and Cystic Fibrosis Queensland in this context.
There's a couple more questions.
Happy to.
Kevin's got a good question here. He's going, what's the best way to find out about clinical trials? Scott Bell's my doctor.
Scott Bell is in touch, very much in touch. But the other way to find out about clinical trials is to go to the American CF Foundation website and click clinical trials or search clinical trials. There's a woman, if you can't find it there, Professor Bonnie, B-O-N-N-I-E, Ramsey, R-A-M-S-E-Y, Ramsey, in University of Seattle, is in charge of coordinating clinical trials for the American Foundation, CF Foundation, and if you do that, but really and truly, well, Scott Bell should, but CF Queensland and CF Australia should also have the contacts to do this.
Nicole's asked an interesting question, and you talked a little bit about it last night, I think, Bob, which is interesting. And she says, why are CF people happy?
Yeah, many years ago, Archie Norman, who was the professor of cystic fibrosis research at Great Ormond Street in London, the famous children's hospital, said to me, Bob, if there's a gene for charm, it lies next to the gene for cystic fibrosis. And we are all familiar with the fact that I'm sure it's true of everyone who signed on to this webinar. The CF children, the CF adults are, in general, very bright, very positive, glass half full people. And I've worked on many diseases, and it's more true of CF than anything else. And of course, we don't really understand why. It may be there's a biological genetic basis for it. It may be that the cystic fibrosis transmembrane regulator protein has some function or other in the brain that we haven't yet discovered, because we often find these proteins have many functions. All I can say is that I feel incredibly blessed to have worked on cystic fibrosis for so many years, because it is just a fantastic condition to work on because of just how committed, how positive, and how bright the people living with CF are. Many friends with CF.
Thanks for your comment, Nicole. It's a good question. Simon, do you want to ask, maybe we might just go with one final question on it. Simon's got his hand up. I'll just turn your mic on, Simon. It seems to work really well. Have you got a final question for us?
Yeah, how old's the oldest person you've seen with CF survive, like and living, normally?
72. 72 for someone with CF and Delta F508. Yep.
Wow, that's really good. Thanks.
Yep. He is really good. And as I say, Mitch Messer's 53 now, and he's determined to hit 80.
Anyway,
Wow.
it's a big call. I noticed the fellow who was heading up the CMC in Queensland retired recently, came out of hospital to retire, and this guy called Ross Martin, lovely guy. I'd met him years ago. He's a barrister, and he's 55. He's waiting for a lung transplant, but so he's doing, he's pretty crook at the moment, but he's made 55, and to head up the CMC is a pretty full-on job. So there are some, these people are in interesting roles and able to do, very energetic things. Are there any other burning questions before we might sign off? Because I'm just aware of Bob's need to head to the airport fairly shortly.
No,
Nicole, have you got another question? Can I turn your microphone on? Your hand's up. Does that mean you've got a question? You there, Nicole? No, she's not answering.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Now we can, yeah. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes, no, I just forgot to turn it off. I don't have another question.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's okay. That's fine anyway. It's great that our microphone system works. Is there anything else people would like to ask? Because I think Bob's got a couple more
No, that's
things
okay.
we're going to do.
Oh, I just wanted to show the slide. People are very worried about cloning people, and just at the end of the years of the Howard government, we did find out they were doing some experiments in Kirribilli, and we came across this in the basement.
Go back one.
Go back one. There it is. Yeah, there you go.
You can put your hands up if you find that a scary picture.
Human cloning experiments. There you go.
Rosa's
Okay.
Hey, Rosa, I noticed you've got your hand up. I'll just turn your microphone on. Hopefully you've got a microphone. Okay.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
Hi. I just had a question. A lot of the people you were mentioning that had a good longevity were males. Is there a difference in life expectancy between males and females in general?
Yeah, there's a marginal difference, and I'm not even certain which way it falls at the moment. It's different at different ages. But the answer is, in general, no. In general, although it's a difference, it's only a difference of a year or two. And I don't know. I'm not sure. You're right, actually. Most of the people I know who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s are men, and I'm not certain why that is. I'll try to find out the answer to that and get back to you on it. But the answer to your question in general is there's very little difference in life expectancy.
Hey, Rosa,
Great. Thank you, Bob.
Hey, Rosa, if you send me an email, I'll send it on to Bob, and he can come back to us. So,
that is known. That is something. The answer is known, and I just don't know it. If you know what I mean.
Okay.
I just know it. I can't remember it.
So
Great. Thank you. I'll do that. I'll send an email to you, Mark. Thank you.
That's great.
Have you got that email address, Rosa?
I think I do.
markb@cfqld.org.au.
Oh, yes, I've got that. I wrote that down at the beginning.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
I'll send it on to Bob, and I'll follow it up, and if we get a definitive answer or there's some research, we might post it on our education element of the website. So
it is known.
Yeah, it's a great
Fabulous.
question. Hey, thanks for asking that.
Thank you.
We might sort of
Thanks a lot.
No, thanks, Rosa. We might sort of draw this to a close. We're sort of over our hour, and I know people have other things to go to. I notice people are highly attentive during this. I know talking to other people running webinars, a lot of people drift off because they're not that interesting, but most of the time this is sitting around 90-95%. So obviously Bob's pretty interesting, and people are very focused on this. Thank you for listening into the webinar. You'll see us advertise other webinars on Facebook and on the CFQ website. We're going to have a program and try and do one a month, so I think you'll find one might go up on Facebook today for next month. We're going to talk about students and studying with CF, and we're going to have a couple of uni students, and I'm chasing some Year 11, Year 12. We want to talk about that sort of cohort of people moving Year 11, Year 12, and then moving into that first year of uni, how people cope with, how the CF kids cope with, and how they manage that transition. So if that's interesting, or you know people who are interested, join us again next month. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you, Bob, for coming up and doing this. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Bye now.
See you later.